And you're listening to 91.3 FM WCW, the Dr. Chris Radio Horror Show. Tonight on the Radio Horror Show, in celebration of the 80th anniversary of The Dark Knight, Batman, as created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, we have on the show with us Athena Finger, the granddaughter of Bill Finger, the creator of Batman. Thank you for coming on the show with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
How did you get involved with learning the truth about the creation of the Dark Knight?
Well, it's something that my father talked about when I was a small child, and I don't remember a time that I didn't know about what Bill did and his contributions to the Dark Knight.
When did it become like a crusade of yours to really get the correct recognition? Because I'd always heard the rumors and mentioned in like YouTube videos of like, oh, Bob had this going on, but yeah, that guy didn't get anything, so on and so forth. And I was always like, what does that mean? And then I was like, oh, that's right, there was somebody else who created Batman. Why isn't this a bigger story? Why isn't this like why don't more people know about this? And why did it take until 2015 for it finally to be slapped on every single label of Batman created by? Not and, but with.
It wasn't a lack of trying. My father did try to get his father's name, Bill's name, attached to the bat. They weren't willing to change, the byline, and they hid behind their contract that they had with Bob Kane and said that, there was really nothing they could do, and that, we would have to sue them to be able to try to get anything done. And so my father didn't really have, the means to hire, a really good lawyer and everything like that to be able to fight DC at the time. My father passed away in 92. I was just shy of my 16th birthday when he passed away. So it was something that fell upon me, but being a minor, I didn't really know which avenue to take to get Bill's name in its proper place. Plus, I'd been kind of discouraged from people that, it was going to take a lot of money. And again, being a minor, I didn't have any means of my own. So I kind of just let it go for a long time. I didn't really pursue or talk about Batman or my grandfather for a good maybe almost 15 years. And so when Mark Nobleman got in touch with me back in 2007 and said he was writing a book about Bill, is kind of when everything came to the forefront and how I should really start thinking about how I can get this rectified. I mean, it had been a long time, and, I was really the only person that was going to be able to resolve the issue legally. I had no idea if other people knew, how many people knew, or what the backstory even really was at that point, other than what I had known from what my dad shared with me. But, I was young when he passed away, so it wasn't like I could go back and ask him to retell me these stories. So I took some time to kind of figure out what my options were. And then, with the 75th anniversary in 2014, and the book came out in 2012, Bill the Boy Wonder, there was a lot of momentum, and I had learned a lot more about how people in the industry did know who Bill was and knew the truth of, the backstory of Batman and how he came about and what Bill's role was. And so coming into the pop culture and the Batman universe, I learned a lot. I learned that there was, actually a fairly good amount of people that knew and really wanted to see Bill get the recognition and the credit that he was long overdue. So it kind of was timing that brought me into actually pursuing the legal side of getting him attached. And, timing has always played an important role in that. People don't seem to realize that, a lot of people in the industry many years ago held on to the agreement that they had with Bob Kane, and they kind of hid behind that. But those people, they started to retire and pass on, and a lot of the people who are running the companies now are the fans, and they want to see, the real story be out there, and history to be the correct history, and not this lie that was fed to the fans for 75 plus years. We were able to come to an agreement that it was time and that Bill should have his name. They had to play with the language, and yes, they used the word with instead of and, which was fine. I mean, I can understand they still have to honor their legal obligations to all the parties involved. And, most of the fans have told me that they don't even see the word with. Their brain automatically switches it to and. So, I mean, it's really just a word, but his name is there, and that's really the most important thing that could have come out of, that whole process.
Just to briefly touch upon it, what is really the difference between with and and?
I think the fact that, when you look at the Siegel and Schuster, they really respected each other and wanted to share the credit.
Right, they did.
Bob Kane didn't want to share the credit. It's something that had to be forced 76 years later. I think that to be safe, they chose the word with instead of and. I don't know fully what their logic was behind it, but I mean, he did it with my grandfather, and my grandfather had more influence on the character. So, I mean, to me, it doesn't bother me that they use the word with, because he did it with him, and I think it's an accurate description. I don't really. I mean, one way or another, his name is there. They're together. They're solidified in history.
It's kind of like off the before we started recording, we mentioned that Jerry, as you said, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster on Superman. We know about their controversy with that, and for years they didn't have their name on the book or whatever until the Superman movie came along, and thank God to Richard Donner and people like Neil Adams, who were just like, "What? Are you kidding me?"
Right.
And now, recently, a lot. I mean, yes, the creator of Wonder Woman has had his name on that, but there's two other people involved with Wonder Woman's creation, because Wonder Woman had a daddy and she had two mothers, and they were like, why isn't Oliver Byrne and Elizabeth Marston's name on Wonder Woman's credits as well? Because if this story is now that public of their relationship together, the three of them had, we also know that they had the big creation of, they were all involved with the creation of Wonder Woman. So now that's becoming like a thing that I've seen more and more of.
Well, I mean, I've been told that, back in the day, really, the Siegel Schuster byline was unusual, and most times you would only see one name listed with the comics, and that was usually the artist, the person who actually drew the comics, and not the writer, or not the penciler or the inker or the colorist or any of the other people that go into it. So I think that with the times changing, you'll see, as you have, more people's names attached to the front of the story. The person who wrote it, the person who did the art, the person who did this and that, and they get more recognition now, because the industry has, kind of seen the importance of giving everyone their proper credit. Hopefully, it will just continue that way, and people will get honored and respected for their work.
And what was the first thing that got Bill's name on it? Was it Batman versus Superman?
For the live action media, yes.
Okay.
And Gotham City, Gotham, the TV show. Actually, right before Gotham, Robot Chicken actually gave him credit.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you know that or not. Which I think is awesome.
That is really fun. The DC Comics special or something, right?
Yes, it was one of their superhero specials that they did. And since it was midnight, which is technically the same day that Gotham was playing during that season, so it wasn't like they did it, a day early or anything. They just they run it 12 o'clock in the morning instead of at 8 o'clock at night. So
that is funny.
They got to list it first, which I think is awesome.
Really how much of a nerd those guys are. I mean, Seth Green and stuff to be like, we're gonna put that in our episode.
Such a fan. He actually, I saw a picture of him where he actually has Bill Finger's button. We have these little buttons with Bill's face on them. And he had one on his head at San Diego Comic-Con doing a panel. And I'm like, no freaking way. Like, that's so awesome that this guy, is such an uber fan. He knows who my grandfather is. And I got to learn a lot of that cool stuff, coming into the culture. I didn't grow up in the comic culture. I didn't go to conventions growing up. I mean, I didn't even really read comics growing up. I wasn't part of that world. So to learn that these people were such fans and really knew the true history of who the creators of this character was very impressive to me. And it warmed my heart to know that people do know what he did, and really cool people know. Also, I mean, it was I think it's wonderful that the fans get to celebrate the man who created this character that influenced their lives, their careers, their artistic abilities, whatever it is. I mean, it's really amazing what Batman and my grandfather's writing has done for people.
What about stuff that's come out previously that is getting, I don't know, like a second printing or re-release? Is his name going to be like retroly put back into that stuff? Because I know they're doing a 30th anniversary screening of the Batman movie from 1989.
Oh, I'm not sure if he will be or not. I'm gonna have to find out about that. That's a good question.
Because I think when they
start, a lot of the compilation books, like the archives and the chronicles, that were printed, in the 90s and I think in the late 80s, they started putting those out. If you look in the table of contents, it tells you which stories are written by whom and penciled and all of that stuff. So Bill does get writer's credit in a lot of those types of publications, and he has for a long time. It's just that he never got the co-creator title until 2015.
True, and I'm kind of hoping that that can happen. You know what I mean? I know that the Batman animated series box set that came out last year didn't. And right. I was kind of, and I immediately took a picture of that and tweeted it out. Like, guys, you went through this entire show and digitally remastered everything. I know this took a long time to do, but is it really that hard on the computer to just type in with Bill Finger print, send to the 25,000 copies that we're printing of this thing?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know why they missed the mark on that one, but I mean, who knows what their reason for? They don't tell me everything.
What was the biggest pushback that you got from really pursuing this? Was it people maybe, and I don't like to bring this up if this is a sensitive subject, but do people accuse the heirs, and this is not just for you, but like the heirs of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster or the Kirbys, do people accuse the heirs of just wanting money?
No, because I've been very vocal. I mean, the money is just a byproduct. My real goal was to correct history. That was my ultimate goal.
That's good.
I know that the fans wanted to see Bill's name in its proper, where it belonged, proper place, right along with Bob Kane and the Batman title. Mm-hmm. I knew that was something that was extremely important, not just for comic fans, but for creators across the board, for an artist who is dealing with the same issue, and know that there is, it can be resolved and you can get it rectified. I mean, there's so many different important factors that came into play for him to get the recognition, not just for Batman and not just for comics. I mean, people have stuff stolen from them all the time, ideas, inventions, artwork. It really was important that part was rectified. And to see that it can't truly have a positive resolution and not just a resolution.
Are you familiar with the artist Tom McFarlane?
Yes.
Okay. He, in a several documentaries, talked about like the why Image Comics needed to be created, because what happened to Jerry and Joe, he was like, God, if it can happen, this happened to the creators of Superman, then nobody cares about me, and he was just like, this just can't happen, because he was so pissed at Marvel over Spider-Man,
right,
and how much money he was making from Marvel with his Spider-Man artwork. him and a bunch of people needed to start Image Comics. And then eventually I also heard him talk about, like, this also happened to one of the creators of Batman and so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have known Bill and knew what he did for the industry. I mean, it wasn't just Batman. I mean, he came up with the original Green Lantern. He wrote this first Kryptonite story for Superman. He, had written for Timely before it became Marvel. I mean, he was in it all over the place. And, he was, I like to refer to him as one of the founding fathers, just like Siegel and Schuster and the other influential people of the time that, were making these important characters, not knowing that they were going to last for 80 years. He really had a huge influence in the industry, and a lot of people knew that.
I was aware of the Alan Scott one, but I didn't know that he was the first one to write a story of Kryptonite for the comic books. Because I think Kryptonite first originated like in the radio show, right? Did he write
that? I don't think it was for the radio show. I think it was before the radio show, but don't quote me on that.
I only say that because I remember they said they needed
story for the actual comics.
The only reason I say that is because I remember them interviewing about, like, Bud Collyer, who was the voice of Superman for like 1,000 episodes of the radio show, needed a break.
Okay.
Needed like a 2-week vacation to rest his voice. And they were like, we need to come up with an idea. So Superman's gone. Oh, what about this substance called kryptonite that, and so on and so forth. So I was wondering if Bill wrote for the radio show or did he like eventually just write it, was he the first one to write it into the comic books? Because then, like, the comic books, the first debut of kryptonite is obviously a very big deal.
I'm not sure. That is a good question.
Because I know Lex Luthor also didn't appear in the comic books first. He appeared in something else. And then he was... he became a bigger deal in the comics. A couple other things obviously were influenced in media and then made their way into the comics.
That is a good question. I'm not sure. I don't have to know like the dates as far as when the issue came out and when that particular radio episode came out to know which one came first, the chicken or the egg with that. But I mean, I know that he wrote the first one for the actual comics. I don't know if it was influenced from the radio show or not. He was very meticulous with his writing. He would leave notes for the artist of what his words were supposed to look like visually. Cool. He did not do any sketching or drawing or anything like that. He was a writer, but he was a very visual writer.
I have a comic book which I cannot take credit for because
Okay.
I am taking a concept that has been historically a male character since its creation and gender swapping it, and no one's kind of done this before. So my credit on the comic book is actually said to be like by the guy who did it, and influenced or whatever. And then my credits down below is like the writer. But I don't call it like I call it the version of what I'm doing of the character, my creation, but not necessarily obviously what the original source material is from. The original source material is giving credit to the original writer from 100 years ago. And I'm working on someone else's comic book coming up very soon, and he is the creator of this character. But he's like, I love to draw, but writing really bothers me a lot, and he wants me to bang out like a couple scripts for him, and he's like, I want to make sure you also get credit on this as the writer of these stories. So I will be the creator and artist, but I want to make sure you get stories by. And I was like, that's really cool. Thank you.
The industry is not what it was back in the, late 30s, early 40s, and where, there was an industry norm. People, like I said before, really do understand that people do deserve recognition and credit for what their contributions are. So I'm glad to hear that this person that you're working with fully recognizes that and is going to give you the recognition and credit that you deserve for your role. I mean, that's all we want. We all want to be recognized for our contributions and things. And again, that's the shift that's been going on in the industry. And I think a lot of it has to do with that they recognize that, Kirby and Bill Finger and all these other people who are huge, in the industry back in the day didn't get the credit that they long overdue deserved. And, I really am happy to see that it's being correct, rectified in that way, and people are getting credit.
And with the Marvel movies, like blowing up every 5 minutes like they are,
Yeah.
I'm not just sitting through the credits anymore. And I wasn't doing this even when Iron Man came out. I'm not sitting through the credits just to see what the post-credit scene's going to be. Ooh, I am now also looking for, did this guy get his credit? You know what I mean? Did that guy get his
Right.
credit? When Guardians of the Galaxy came out and they broke down every single character in that movie as a different person credited for it, I was like, that's amazing. Or when Captain Marvel came out or whatever, and Captain Marvel has had several people work on the title character. Granted, the female version was created by Kelly Sue McCormick, and the male character that first started it all was created by Roy Thomas and Gene Colan and Stan Lee. That, there's many different aspects because that movie is a mesh of so many different things. That was really cool to see. Like, they listed them all in just one giant bubble, letting everyone know that all these people did this. And they do that with, like, I ran into somebody at a Comic-Con. I had him sign his creator-owned book, and I was like, I really like the story and so on and so forth. And I forgot how the conversation started, but he was like, you're going to be surprised to hear this, but I get very few royalties from this company for this character that I own versus the Flash. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, so I got this check in the mail all of a sudden from DC Comics with a letter saying that upon your agreement with us, you will get residual royalties from the Flash television show because we used concepts from a comic book that you wrote for the TV series. And that made me go to DC Comics' office or whatever, thanking them, but also going, so what's going on? And they said, oh, we have this guy we hired. He sits there and reads comic books for Warner Brothers. And then they ask him to pull apart comic books to be like, okay, so this Flash does this, and he does that, and this issue, and it's written by this guy and drawn by this guy.
Wow.
And I've had
so
more than one person.
stepping up their game then.
Seriously.
They don't want to get sued again, I guess.
I've had more than one person who I didn't know working on The Flash, Arrow, Supergirl, Black Lightning, the DC Legends, tell me that they got this like mystery check from DC Comics or whatever for not like enough to pay a mortgage, but some decent amount from how much
something.
From how much whatever the commercials cost that they aired during it, because they used, and they even state what issue is that character is from the comic books. And I was like, that is fascinating. And like, yeah, it's like a percent. It's like a single digit percent too.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's something. I mean, and if it wasn't truly negotiated in the beginning, at least they're trying to, do right by these people in some way.
I mean, if Bill or even Bob, or anybody, with the exception of Stan Lee, who just recently passed away, could see like how much these creations, how big they're doing in media, years ago, years later after they have passed on or whatever, would be astonished. I mean, look at the Oscars. The Oscars blew up because it was a well-received Oscar show, but Spider-Man and the Black Panther won Oscars for their great accomplishments in the cinema. But if you said that 55 years ago when the Senate House Committee was tearing comic books apart on the Senate floor because of their, the seduction of the innocent nonsense, you would be like, what bizarro land is this?
No, it's true. I mean, it really has come into a completely different culture. And it's so embedded in our day-to-day culture across the board. You don't have to be a comic fan to know about these characters.
What's the number one TV series on cable right now? Still, The Walking Dead, based on a comic book.
And I just, there's so much creativity that's coming out of that whole culture that, now it's really mainstream, and it's not just those funny pages anymore for kids. It's really, they have a lot of meaning behind them, and they have, someone is going to attach to one of these characters because it hits upon something that's very personal to that person in one way or another. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that it's gone this way. It's just, it's taken a long time for the rest of our culture to catch up to what these people are trying to share with these characters.
My father recently died, and he hated comic books. He thought comic books were like the corruption of the whatever, and
Right.
he never understood my love of comic books. I mean, he watched an episode of Batman the Animated Series with me here and there, and he liked the Batman movies with Michael Keaton, but when I was really into comic book collecting, he didn't get it. And I never got to ask him years later, because we never really made up after a big fight we had, about
Oh, I'm
like,
sorry to
hey,
hear that.
about what is his stance on comic books now that they are so much in the zeitgeist of everything, and you can't walk into any retail store like Walmart or not Kmart, the mall.
But even Kmart back in the day, I mean, they all had superhero stuff everywhere.
Right.
I
I
mean,
almost said Sears and Toys R Us too, but those were outside of business.
but Toys R Us is coming back, so don't.
Yeah,
don't
maybe. We'll see.
yeah.
We'll see. But you know what I mean? Like normal retail stores that aren't just specialty shops to like,
No,
whatever.
it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
not a sports store, but they got to have like selling stuff or whatever. The comic book stuff is everywhere. It's so, comic book movies are just blowing everything out of the water. And, he made fun of the fact that comic books were in a slump in the 90s, with Marvel filing for bankruptcy.
right.
He really made fun of me about that, and really made it point out that, like, trying to show me, like, how right he was that comic books were failing. Going back to your grandfather really quick, do you have anything of his? Do you have any, like, anything that he worked on? Anything, like, memorialized?
Well, when I got to meet Paul Lovitz back in 2008, I went to the DC office when they were still in in New York. He was so nice. He gave me a big tour of the office. I got to meet tons of people that worked there that were honored to meet me. It was weird. Like the whole thing was kind of strange to me because, at that time I was still not really understanding the magnitude of what I was about to walk into as far as being Bill's representative and being Bill's, kind of stand in for people to thank and show their appreciation for Bill too, because Bill's not here and my dad's not here. So it falls upon me. So he was really generous, and he, before he took me to lunch was like, listen, I have a present for you. And I'm like, okay, the president and publisher of DC has a present for me. Okay, like you haven't already done so much wonderful stuff for me today, but okay. And he gave me the last script that Bill submitted to DC the night that he passed away. It's not a Batman story. He stopped working on Batman in the 60s, but he started writing for some of their obscure titles. This particular script was marionette puppets that were like Dracula and Wolfman and Frankenstein, but they were really Dracula and Wolverine, the werewolf, and they were really alive, but they were the size of marionettes. So it was this really weird sci-fi horror type comic, and that was the last script that he submitted to be published. And he gave me the script, and it's the only thing that they had left of Bill's in the office. So I thought that was amazing because I figured that most of that stuff was gone because nothing really got saved.
Right. There were stories of Jack Kirby stuff being thrown out, and people were like, what are they doing?
Oh, well, after Bill passed away, my dad tried to take a whole box of, Bill's stuff over to DC and be like, here, you might want these for your archives. Like his gimmick book and other stories and things like that. And they said, nope, we don't want it. So it just ended up in the garbage because my dad had no place for it. So, a lot of those, goodies were sent to the dumpster, unfortunately. It's really sad. The other thing that I do...
One can only hope that maybe that dumpster garbage guy found it, kept it. It's in an attic somewhere, It might smell bad, but...
we can only hope.
Weirder stuff has been found. You heard the story about the guy who found a copy of Action Comics #1 in his grandma's attic underneath a trunk, right? And it was pressed tight, sealed by the vacuum of, just something sitting on top of a magazine for 70 years.
Right.
And it is considered to be the most near mint condition of Action Comics ever. And it's worth $3 to $4 million.
Wow. That's crazy. You never know. I mean, there might be stuff out there.
I got to hold a copy of Detective Comics number 27. It was a 1.5 grade, but I had to ask the guy, "Can I please hold that?" And it was in a sealed like plastic, those CGC things, and I got to hold it, and I was just like, "What's that over there?" Run away. No, that didn't happen. But I was so happy he let me hold it. He's like, "Yeah, you can hold it." I was like, "I've never seen a copy of this."
Yeah,
he's like,
no,
"Yeah, CGC."
I've never seen an actual copy of one of the originals myself, so that's awesome.
I picked up a blank cover of Detective Comics number 1000, and I was the one who tweeted the photo. I don't know if you got my photo tweet to you of your grandfather's name on the the inside front cover. I'm getting on the blank cover because Detective Comics number 1000 is not the 1000th appearance of Batman in that comic book, because he first appeared in issue 27. And that's always the big joke. It's like, why are we making such a big deal about issue 1000? It's not until 1027. Are we going to do a whole nother like midnight release extravaganza for that?
You never know.
Yeah. But so on the blank cover, I'm going to get Slam Bradley, which was the detective that first appears in Detective Comics number 1, versus a rendition of Fu Manchu, because he's the villain on the cover of Detective Comics number 1.
Oh, that's going to be awesome, though.
Yeah, I'm going to have like two different artists. One do Slam and one do the Fu Manchu. And someone's like, "Are you going to give him like the long fingernails and the yellow skin?" And I'm like, "No, because I want to post this online and I don't need the... But someone's like, "You're not going to put Batman on it?" I'm like, "No, because Detective Comics number 1 had the first appearance of Slam Bradley." Not gonna ask, do you have a favorite Batman?
That's like the most common question.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It just makes me laugh because everybody wants to know. Well, I mean, Michael Keaton, I think, did an amazing job with Batman. I think that he was able to play both parts, which is not the easiest thing to do.
It also makes...
And then if you're just going on voice, then of course Kevin Conroy. Because I mean, the animated series, I was in love with that cartoon for so long. I mean, it was amazing. So I watched it religiously.
I had heard that in the documentary, and that's why our intro music for this episode was the animated score by the late, great Shirley Walker.
Which I totally picked up on that.
Did you hear, speaking of the animated series, today the news broke, did you hear what role Mark Hamill is playing?
Yes, I did. And I was like, what? That's crazy.
And when the trailer came out about a month ago, they don't show Chucky at all. But the laughter, I was like, wow, does that sound like the Joker's laugh? That's so weird. Gee.
I wonder why.
It's really funny that, Luke went completely over to the dark side as a serial killer.
Completely.
Yeah. But it's like every time you hear Mark playing a bad guy character, he's going to sound like the Joker. It doesn't matter who it is. Multiple bad guys.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about your grandfather and the 80th anniversary of Batman. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.